Developments of the past few weeks. Well, first, government forces managed to seize back control of key areas in Homs and a town near the border with Lebanon. Then the rebels fought back. They won control of an important airbase near Turkey. They also mounted audacious attacks in both Damascus and in the heartlands of Bashar al-Assad's Alawite community in the north, in Latakia province. Well, Kurds are also being increasingly drawn into this conflict, and there are worries, as ever, about the growing numbers and strength of al-Qaeda-linked fighters. All this, and still no clear picture of when or how Syria's conflict will end. Oliver Farry has this roundup of the latest developments.
General Salim Idris of the Free Syrian Army visits rebel troops in Latakia province, the home region of President Bashar al-Assad. An activist video of uncertain date shows the rebel leader announcing the FSA were digging in for the long fight.
We are here to reaffirm that the Military Council coordinates closely with the commanders on the coastal front and that there have been no orders to withdraw for any of the units. On the contrary, we are going to continue our operations.
General Idris also rejected accusations that the FSA was getting ready to face off against Islamist allies. Though a government stronghold, rebels hold pockets in the province, such as the port city of Latakia, which came under heavy bombardment by the Syrian Air Force last week. The city was captured by an al-Qaeda-linked group last March. Also bombed last week was the city of Raqqa on the River Euphrates in the north of the country. It is also held by the rebels. Government forces remain strong in the centre and south of Syria, particularly around the capital Damascus, though rebels contest some areas in its hinterland. The Syrian army wrested control recently of Khalidiyya in Homs province from the rebels, who had held it for 2 years. The conflict remains very much a stalemate, with each side making mostly piecemeal gains. Over 100,000 people have died in the conflict since it started in early 2011.
Well, a reminder now of our panel tonight. William Jordan is a former US State Department official who was stationed in Damascus. Elias Ward is a member of the Syrian National Council and a researcher at, tell me the university.
Université Paris Sud, or 11.
11, très bien. Paris Sud. In the UK tonight, Shuan Zolal is a Kurdish blogger and a political and security risk analyst. Barak Barfi is a research fellow at the New America Foundation and an independent Middle East analyst as well. He's at Antakya in Turkey. And Majid Rafizadeh is a Syrian-Iranian political analyst and a lecturer at Oxford University tonight. He is in Washington, and thank you to you all once again. Just to bring your attention, we're getting lots of tweets in, it has to be said tonight. Another one from Botan Alan. Why should Kurds postpone the recognition of their rights? Why is the Syrian National Coalition postponing their aspirations? Elias Ward, that goes back to the point you were making that Syria's territorial integrity must be respected. Here is someone challenging that, saying, why shouldn't the Kurds take advantage of this, if you like, and go ahead and get their own rights established?
Well, I think the main problem now is the presence in the battles in Syria, in the war in Syria, is the presence of jihadists. It's a very real complication of the situation, and I think only 2 words about this. The international community is responsible of the presence of this jihadist, because we know that at least the first year of the Syrian revolution, there's no jihadist, not at all. And now there are many, and every day there are again and more jihadists in Syria. I think we must stop. The first thing to do to stop this flow of jihadists in Syria.
This is the Al-Nusra Front,
yes,
and also the
Al-Nusra.
The state, they're looking for an Islamic State in Iraq
Chechen,
and Syria.
Also, there's Chechen also. I give only one example. Also, how the regime and the allies of the regime also manipulate some of these jihadist groups. For instance, the first thing that a Chechen group made when I heard about this group is to take as hostages 2 évêques, I don't know.
Bishops.
Yes, bishops. The first thing, any person who supports Syrian revolution know that the regime play on the register of the protector of Christian communities and all things. So he cannot do this.
Okay, well, let me ask.
Okay.
Let me ask William Jordan to respond to one of your points, because you said just before you go on, because Elias said it's the fault of the West that we've got all of these extremist groups, these foreign fighters, these jihadists infiltrating the rebellion. Do you go along with that? Is it all the dilly-dallying by the international community to blame?
Well, I agree with the basic point that the West's response, and some would say in particular Washington's response, has not been up to the nature of the actual situation in Syria. My own criticisms are much different than that, but I think that the infiltration or the move by jihadists into Syria to take advantage of the situation there for their own gain, or their own situation, or for their own purposes, is entirely predictable given what has happened throughout the larger Middle East, as well as into even Chechnya in the former Soviet Union or in Russia. I mean, you've had this happening for years, and I think it was almost inevitable, especially with Iraq right next door. And right now the linkage between Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State in Iraq is pretty clear. And I think this was inevitable. And even with Lebanon next door, I mean, there was going to be some kind of a cross-border infiltration of bad groups into the Syrian conflict, no matter what. It's just a question of, I think it's the duration of the civil war and the unlikelihood of any kind of an immediate political resolution of it is going to compound this even more. And we're going to see, I hate to say it, even more of these kinds of groups going in.
Majid Rafizadeh, what do you make of that? I mean, what started as a popular uprising against an authoritarian regime has turned into something very different now, hasn't it? People with very different ideas about what Syria should look like post Bashar al-Assad.
You're absolutely right. I think first, concerning the previous question, is it the fault of the West? I think it's more complicated than that. I think what we're witnessing here is a really simultaneous concentric circles of tensions. The rebels against Assad, the second one, rebels against themselves. And the third one is a regional one between Iran, Hezbollah on one side, and then we have the the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And the international level, we have Russia and United States, so-called Cold War. So this is a more complicated. I think that's highlights the complexity of the civil war in Syria. And the civil war in Syria is a multi-layered conflicts, which is very difficult to resolve, these multi-layered conflicts where there are different actors, non-state actors, state actors involved and have stakes in the war, and they are directly or indirectly involved in Syria. But again, I think we should point out that I think here, I think this move by the Assad regime, I think it was militarily and I think a war-like method, we call it, or it's a classic move that he uses to divide and rule. And I think when he withdrew his troops from the northeast part of Syria, I think there were several reasons he did that. First of all, he could pit the Kurds against the Sunni majority rebels, and the second thing, he can focus his troops on a more important cities like Aleppo and Damascus. And the third thing, I think it was some sort of political warning or political revenge against Erdogan, that by emboldening the Kurds in Syria, that could be a threat to the Turkish government. So I think this is also some military tactics used by the regime in order to divide and create a chaotic situation, which enables it to rule, and the final situation, in a war situation, it can defend its own Alawite community and create statelets inside Syria.
Shwan Zalal, perhaps you'd like to come in on that point. What do you make of what Majid Rafizadeh has just been saying, that it's the regime itself that is stirring up these divisions and playing various communities against each other? After all, if this was just a Sunni uprising and it was the Sunnis overthrowing the Shia, the Alawites, etc., it would have ended a long time ago. It's not just a numbers game, is it? It's much more complicated.
Well, I agree. I mean, the whole conflict in Syria is very complicated, and the sectarian and the violence has been instigated by the Assad regime, and he's been playing games with all the sides and trying to play everyone against each other. That's a fact. But let's not forget the regional powers who have a big stake in this, namely Iran and Turkey, because and going back to the earlier question about the Kurds and the integrity of Syrian borders, and whether the Kurds can sort of take away part of Syria and become not an independent, but become. I mean, if you look at Iraq, we have the Kurdish region in Iraq, and that model could easily be applied to Syria, and that model has worked. If you look at the rest of Iraq and the northern region of Iraq, it's a complete contrast. The Kurds the economy is booming. They have a parliamentary democracy to the Middle Eastern standard, but it's fairly functional, and the order is changing in that region. The Kurds, again, to the tweet earlier where somebody says why Kurds should wait for their rights or it to be delayed. The reality is the Kurds have been waiting for 19 years for other people to give them their rights, and this this Arab Spring is sort of emboldened the Kurds, and now they have something in their hand, and it's very unlikely to let go. And we've seen that in Iraq in the past 20-25 years, that region has evolved and it proved that it can run itself. They can function as a country and responsibly. And this could easily be replicated in Syria. When I understand, your guests and viewers and many people think that the Syrian border you can't be touched, because if you look at Iran, they have their Kurdish problem, and then Turkey, which both take in different sides. So that if you take in that context and then talk about the jihadists, both sides are quite happy to fund jihadists and arm jihadist people to stir up more violence and try to take away territory from the Kurds rather than fund or support the Kurds. Because if we look at the refugees coming to Kurdistan region of Iraq, they have the least amount of support from all the other refugee camps in Jordan and Turkey. I think Germany is the only country who has given any substantial amount of money to support the refugees there. So the Kurds have been left to their own devices. And this is an opportunity which is a historical opportunity for the Kurds in the region who have a voice. The old, people talk about the Syrian borders. Syrian borders is 90 years old. As we know, people think that Syria, as we know, it doesn't exist.
What about the point that if that happened, if the Kurds were to get their own homeland, you would get other breakaways? The turbulence would spill over into Lebanon. It would spill over into Iraq, which is already a very volatile, violent country, and it would just plunge the whole region into war. It would take away any certainty at all, any certainty brought about by those national borders.
Well, I agree, but let's look at the facts on the ground. It already has spilled over. I think the only place it hasn't spilled over is Turkey. If you look at all the neighboring countries, apart from Jordan and Turkey, Jordan doesn't have a state, but if you look at Lebanon, Hezbollah already came into Syria and fighting alongside the regime, and then you have the al-Nusra and other groups from the opposition. They're coming in from Turkey. They go in and they get supplies from there. In Iraq, we have one of the jihadist groups. They actually want to establish a state between Iraq and Sham or Syria. So it has spilled over. We can sort of argue, say, well, it hasn't gone that far. But if you look at the state of Iraq and if you look at the state of Syria now, it's becoming clear this borders has been created artificially 90 years ago.
All right, Shwan Zalal, hold that thought for a moment. I want to bring in Barak Barfi, because you did make a lot of points there. I think, Barak, you yourself used the word stalemate earlier. We've just seen a report as well about the various tit-for-tat violence that's going on. We seem to be at a deadlock. If moving the borders, changing the borders in this part of the world ended the conflict, surely that could only be a positive thing.
Not really, because the problem is ever since the Sykes-Picot agreement between the British and the French after World War II that basically established the borders of the modern Middle East, we haven't seen people redraw borders on the map. We've tried to keep the territorial integrity of the countries that were created in the aftermath of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And if we start now to redraw lines on a map, it could create problems in other countries in the region. So that is something the international community really needs to worry about. The larger problem here is how can we move forward? How can we end this conflict? How can we bring it to an end so that the violence and the killing and the centripetal forces that are bringing in a more jihadist ends? And we need a step up commitment from the Western powers, and we really haven't seen that. They've made promises to the Syrian rebels and they haven't followed through. That means that the people inside are more and more apt to rely on jihadists who are much stronger and have power on the ground to put pressure on the regime. When we looked at a country like Libya, Libya did not become a magnet for foreign jihadists from the Arab and greater Islamic world. Why? Because NATO got in much quicker and was able to turn the table against Muammar Gaddafi and his regime, and really build on support for more nationalist, more moderate forces than Islamists and jihadists. So that was how that model played out there. The West basically waited much too long to get involved in the Syrian conflict, which allowed other foreign factors, other foreign organizations to come in and really create a mess that cannot be resolved anytime soon.
William Jordan, is Libya the ideal case when we look at it?
I certainly don't think so. I mean, I take the point that I think that where Libya is a case in point. And with all due respect to Professor Ward, I mean, I think the issue is that in Libya, what was important was that there was eventually a fairly cohesive Libyan opposition that came together and was able to coordinate military activities successfully, admittedly, with considerable help from NATO. But in the end, it was the Libyan people who ultimately won the conflict, who ousted the Gaddafi regime and succeeded on the ground. That's what's got to happen in Syria. Sadly, I believe that this is going to take a very long time. And as I said on this platform once before, just a few weeks ago, I think that the West is completely mistaken in trying to push a false political compromise. I mean, the international community has to do what international communities have to do and try to broker some sort of a political, peaceful outcome to this, but it's not going to happen. So what is going to happen is continued efforts, continued help to the Syrian National Council and to the Free Syrian Army to be able to coordinate military operations more effectively. I said the last time, and it's continuing to be the case, that the Syrian opposition is proving that despite losing the momentum on the battlefield a few weeks ago, it is holding its own, and it is still able to strike at the regime in ways that the regime is not always prepared to respond to. Yes, it's a stalemate, and yes, it's going to take a long time. But for the international community, the most important thing is to provide the meaningful help to the Syrian National Congress to be able to carry out this conflict and to manage, as it is going to have to probably for a decade, the spillover consequences, including the jihadist infiltration into Syria that we're seeing.
Let me bring in another viewer, Hama Husso. Most Syrians want this war to end. If the SNC really represents them, they will negotiate peace. Now, we were supposed to have a peace conference in Geneva. It was supposed to be in May. It was delayed and delayed and delayed. Yes. Possibly might happen this month. We don't know. Part of the reason it was delayed was because the Syrian opposition couldn't decide who they wanted to go and represent them. There is a huge problem with that. When you compare it to the situation in Libya, like William Jordan just did, there isn't a very cohesive opposition.
Yes, it's true. I agree that it's a real problem for the Syrian opposition. But on the same time, I think this opposition would to be more to cooperate better than it is the situation now. I mean, the different component of the democratic opposition to exclude jihadists, I mean, completely of the equation, because I think now they are a real danger for the Syrian revolution, this jihadist group, for most of them, because there's some special situation. We can't qualify the fighters as a jihadist because they are poor persons who are persecuted by the regime, and they look for any help from anywhere to defend themselves, and so they take help even from jihadists, and so they let their bar and so on. They are not a real jihadist, I mean, but well, about...
Well, some of them are very real jihadists, though, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard of
Sure.
all sorts of atrocities, and even in
Yes.
areas controlled by rebels, where Sharia law is imposed on the local community, and there are brutal killings and things like that are reported. Some Syrians are probably saying, "Wow, is this really what we want? Do we want to get rid of Assad and have this?"
I think at the end of the war in Syria, I don't want to say a civil war, because it's not. It's a war from a party, from an army of the regime against its people. It's not the same thing as a war, a civil war. But I think that to help to at the end of this war, jihadists haven't any support in the Syrian people. It's the history of Syria and the tradition of the Syrian people who prove this situation. So I think even recently we know that there are some events as the population, the civil population in the north of Syria, in the region of Idlib, for instance, they made a manifestation against jihadists, and there were 15 people, some of them children, killed by jihadists. So even Syrian people can't accept and can't agree or support jihadists. They will be really against them. I think I agree with you completely. The main problem now, the most urgently thing to do is to help and to support the Syrian democratic opposition.
But how do you stop the weapons? How do you, if America and Europe are giving weapons and giving aid, how do you stop those weapons from falling into the hands of Al-Qaeda, from falling into the hands of the very countries, of the very people that want to destroy those countries?
I think really, scientifically, we know that there's security services, there's satellite in the sky, and everything. We know that where are supporters of Syrian army, Free Army. Where are they on the, and where jihadists are. And we can really, if there is a real wishing politically to help, we can parachute by parachute to give for the
they are looking to develop weapons that can be tracked. I don't know if they're yet.
I think it's a political question.
All right,
Yes.
Shwan Jalal, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Shwan Jalal, you wanted to come in there.
Well, I mean, the reality on the ground is these jihadist groups are doing the bidding for all sides. I mean, this is playing in the hand of Iran and Turkey as well on one side, because Iran, they have an agenda. They're trying to say the oppositions are infiltrated by the jihadists, and to stop the Western support for the opposition on one hand, and then on the other hand you have the Turkey who'd like to weaken the Kurdish position and take as much territory away from them. I mean, what's been happening? They've been going into villages, terrorizing the population, killing some, and then destroying the villages. So the residents don't come back. I mean, this can only amount to ethnic cleansing. What's happening in Syria? I mean, all the sides seem to be ganging up on the Kurds in Syria, because it's in nobody's interest from the regional powers for the Kurds to have an entity or to have a region like what we see in northern Iraq. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I'm from Iraq myself. I'm a Kurd from the northern part. I visit there quite often. When I'm in the north part of Iraq, it's fairly safe. I don't need any security and protection. But you go to the rest of Iraq, it's a misery. I mean, even after 10 years after the invasion by the US, and I mean, a lot of people talk about support. This is what happened in Iraq, and you can see the aftermath. Daily killings of 50, 60 people with car bombs. And again, these are jihadist groups. These are sectarian, ethno-sectarian divides within the country. So, I mean, we can say, well, yes.
Shwan Zulal, I'm terribly sorry to cut you off. We have run out of time, though. We're going to have to leave it there. Shwan Zulal, thank you to you. Thank you, Elias Ward. Thank you, William Jordan, Barak Barfi as well, and Majid Rafizadeh. Thank you to all my guests for taking part. And thanks to you for watching. That's it for this edition of the France 24 debate. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow.